Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode season 2. This is my number 29 of my I Love Learning podcast. My name is Dr. Gina Anderson, and I am the host of the I Love Learning podcast, and I'm the CEO of Luma Brighter Learning. Luma helps the transportation and logistics industry save lives through our award-winning learning management system. And if you want to find out more about Luma Brighter Learning, you can go to lumabrighterlearning.com. And I would love if you like my podcast just to subscribe to it on the YouTube channel by clicking the link in the comments. And thank you so much for joining us today, whether you're live or you're joining us later. If you're live, let us know where you're tuning in from around the world in the chat. And if you're ready to meet our guest today, type "let's go" in the comments. And I am super honored and excited to introduce you to our guest this week. Her name is Suzanne Jabour, and I am personally excited to talk to her today. She is a grief educator, a coach, a consultant, an author, a TEDx speaker, and she is changing our response to grief because we can actually do better. So let's welcome Suzanne to our show today. And I would love for her to share like a little bit about her and her passion. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's such a great question. I never like to introduce myself, but here we go. I am a grief educator, and I have ended up on that path out of my own experience, which I think is really true of most of the people that work in the grief space. We've come there because we had a loss in our own life, and either we decided we wanted to help other grievers, which I also do, or we wanted, which is my passion, is to really shift the paradigm and shift the system around how we respond to people who are grieving, both in our personal lives, in our workplaces, in our communities. Because, it ended up being the name of my TEDx talk, if grief is hard and we can do better, we just can't. And that comes really from understanding grief better and then really being thoughtful about how we're responding in a way that grievers are able to receive, right? It all comes back to that sort of meeting people where they are and really understanding that what's happening in our brains, what's happening with our capacities as grievers really makes it so the offers that we get aren't ones we can take. And then we feel isolated. The people trying to help us feel like they don't know how to help. And it just makes a big mess. And we create isolation instead of connection. So that's really what I have become all about, is how can I help shift that conversation, help shift that understanding, so we're showing up to help people in a different way.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know if you know this, but I'm going to share in the comment. I love this topic. I think a lot of people, that experience grief or have seen how people are treated who are grieving can connect to it. So I wrote an article for Inc. magazine on this very topic. I shared, I had posted it in the blog, but how we can learn through loss. And one of the reasons why, Suzanne, I really wanted you on my podcast is because this idea is we never know what somebody is going through, right? Like you never know, like most people don't know that this weekend on Sunday, I am going to be having the memorial for my mom. Who passed away. And so, you just never know. And so this idea of not judging and working with someone like yourself, who is a grief counselor, who can really help if you are having trouble to help move yourself forward. Because at the end of the day, everyone processes our brains, and the chemicals that actually are present at the time that you experience loss can really impact how you move through loss. And so it's really critical that, first of all, you are kind to yourself to process and experience grief, right? But then also to help other people. So Susan, what got you interested in this topic? Was it something that you learned? Was it like your own experience, or what got you interested in this passion that you have?
Yeah, for me, it 100% came out of my own experience. I am a bereaved mother. So in September of 2020, received that middle of the night phone call that every parent dreads. And, the police calling to tell me that my son had died. And I knew very early on that even though I had experienced other losses of people close to me, my dad died when I was in my early 30s. I think I was 31, and my mom when I was about 43 or 4. And then Ben died about, I don't know, I can't really math right now. After that. So it wasn't the first loss of someone close to me. And I just want to, share with you that, losing a mother as a daughter, I think especially, is a really tricky loss. So just holding all the space and all the whatever you need as you navigate this, ceremonial goodbye for your mom. It's such a tricky time. And I knew for me that I didn't know enough about it to know how I wanted to do it, to know how I wanted to support my daughter. And I had to become a student really as a matter of my own survival. And then what I learned as I sort of kept going down that path was that other people also didn't know very much. And people trying to support us didn't know enough to know how to do that. And there's so much fear because it's that fear of the unknown. It's that fear of what we don't understand that we end up tangled and we end up not doing anything because we don't want to do harm. And then we end up all feeling isolated. And it's such a time that's so rich for connection if we know how to do it. And we can get past the fear and try something imperfectly, brilliantly, messily. It's going to be messy. And it really is a new skill set that we need because we don't have it right now. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to help people. We know how to say, my thoughts and prayers are with you. Anything you need, let me know. Neither of those are particularly helpful.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is, I wanted to ask you this about happiness because grief is devastating, right? It takes the wind out of you. It's the darkest of dark that dark can see, right? And so how do you find happiness? How do you move forward, and what keeps you happy every day after such a significant loss?
It really is one moment, one breath, one baby step. I find a lot of comfort in nature. So for me, I tend to go there. And even this morning, I was on a walk with the dog, talking with some friends, and it's blossom time where I am. I'm in Vancouver, Canada. So it's very spring here. We're at the forefront of spring. And so all the blossoms are out in the trees. And there's one tree in my neighborhood where the graft either didn't work or worked beautifully. And so there's pink and white blossoms on the same tree. So it's just that moment to stop and go, wow. I'm thinking of the quote from your guest from last week, which I'm going to get wrong, but the gist of it is, not every day is beautiful, but there's beauty in every day.
Yes.
So it's finding that little piece of, okay, right now my heart is broken. And I actually am in the midst of another recent, really traumatic loss. And my heart is broken. And those blossoms are still beautiful. And I can still pause and hear the birds are in full on Twitter mode where I am, right? It is very spring in my neighborhood. The birds are in full on Twitter mode and the grass is green and the flowers are all coming back. And there's so much beauty. And we have to hold all of those things together. I remember saying to my daughter in the very early days after Ben died, we're going to become masters at holding paradox. Because you're grieving and there's joy. You're grieving and there's moments of happiness. You're grieving and looking for beauty. And as a grieving mother, especially, I know I will grieve that loss forever. And I'm okay with that. I've completely come to peace with that because I know I can grieve and have an impact. I can grieve and laugh. I can grieve and be happy. So it's about finding how do those things all braid together to really create our one big, messy, beautiful life.
Oh, I love that. And you talked about our guest last week, Noah, and I think he sort of just answered his question, but maybe you can expand on it. He was really impressed by your passion and what you do. And he wanted to know, is there a recipe for handling grief? Like maybe that's the next book you write. Maybe it is the book you write. Right. What's the recipe for handling grief?
I know. I'm like, why have I not written that book yet? Anyway, I love that question so much. And for me, the recipe is conscious and curious. So, and that's knowing I had very early on about how my survival was going to work, what my path for my own personal grief was going to be. conscious is about the emotions, because in North America especially, we are A+ students at ignore the bad ones, which is a whole problem. That's a different episode. I'm sure you've talked about this idea of sort of good and bad emotions, positive and negative. So it's allowing all of them, the despair and the horror and the happiness and the gratitude all at the same time, and ignoring none of them, because I knew the stuffing that we're all so good at was not going to work. And curious is about, in the earliest days, it's really about how to survive and how do I honor my own capacity, which is vastly diminished. And how do I, one of my earliest curiosities literally was about, when you are sobbing so hard that you can't breathe, how do you oxygenate your body? Like, how does that even work? And that really was one of my first curiosities, was I don't know, but I'm going to need to figure that out, because I know this gasping is not helping my body, right?
Yes.
So, and then that curiosity really is what's led me down this path to becoming, a certified grief educator, and now speaker and author and TEDx speaker. And just holding that, the consciousness, the honoring, the permission of all the emotions. And then the curiosity about, yes, in the beginning, survival. How do you get the stuff done? How do you get through each day? And then about what now is possible. What does my life look like now? Because for me, when my son died, I was very clear that the person I was before I received that phone call no longer existed.
Right.
So who am I now was a lot of my curiosity, especially in the first 2 years, really was about, who even am I? Like, what parts of myself am I going to carry with me? And what parts am I happy to leave behind? And how do I put them all back together into whatever serves me best now?
Yes, that's beautiful. Oh, look at Alyssa said the same thing. Alyssa, you just stole my words. It is beautiful. I love that. Yeah, she said, I think of so often we feel guilty laughing or being happy after a loss, like it somehow disrespects or dishonors the person you lost, but we aren't limited to feel only one emotion.
Yeah, and the way we honor our person, our loved one, is in living a big, full life. It doesn't honor my son or my daughter for me to curl up in a ball and give up. So my honoring of him really is about, how can I use the life that I'm living to really make a difference, to really help people who need help.
Yeah, absolutely. What is winning? This season is all about winning. I love this season because everyone has a different view on what winning means to them. So what does winning mean to you?
That's such a hard question, because in our paradigm, the flip side of winning is losing. And I think that we actually are all kind of winning all the time, even when it feels like we're losing. But when I think about winning in grief, it's really about giving yourself, if you're the griever, giving yourself that permission to do what's right for you, and not listening to all the noise that's coming at you about how you should be doing it, because most of that is not helpful. So finding the, either the mentor or the coach or the Facebook group or whatever, whatever you're able to access that looks at grief in a way that makes sense to you, and just honoring your own needs. And I think for us as a collective, when it comes to winning about grief, it's about understanding it better. It's about breaking the silence and speaking about it in a way where we get a new understanding, or we get a different perspective. It was interesting. My TEDx talk just got released before today, one of the days last week. One of the things that happens in grief is you lose your sense of time. So I'm in those earliest enough phases with my most recent loss that I think it's Thursday today. So a day before today. And so I was talking with someone about it, and she ended up telling me her loss story. And then I was sharing my loss story, and not in a way where she was trying to fix me or I was trying to fix her, which is kind of where we end up often, but in a way where we were just saying, oh yeah, isn't that interesting? With that curiosity, no judgment, no fixing. We are not broken. We might feel broken. We might look broken, but we are not broken. We are having a very human experience. That's part of life for all of us if we're prepared to acknowledge it. And when we can come together and say, oh, yeah, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm really feeling great about that. And then you share what you're struggling with or feeling great about, then we learn together. And we're such sense-making beings as humans. That's how we're programmed. So when we have those gaps in communication and understanding, which we have around grief, it's very hard to make sense of it because we feel like we're the only one. I am the only person that as a griever has ever stood in the shower not remembering if I've washed my hair yet. Well, that's not true. It happens to lots of us, right? But if we talk about it, then we know that we don't feel so scared. But if we're not talking about it, it can be really scary. The physical symptoms, like the physiological stuff that's happening to you, the stuff that's happening in your brain, can feel really scary if you don't know that it's normal.
Absolutely. You're talking to a learning scientist, so I understand.
I know, right?
It's so true. Yes, yes. And that's the thing, like stories connect us and it gives someone else a safe space to share their story to be able to connect in that way. Because, you know, I have a client who's lost a child. I mean, several clients who've lost children, and they may think they're alone, but you know, when you start to share, you can connect with others. And like you said, it's not about fixing, it's about just being, right? Being there for each other. And it opens up the door for educating and supporting each other. So I love that. When you educate, what are some of the things that you do to help people to open up this knowledge or the education to people? Like, how do you spread the goodness that you're doing?
I think the most important things I talk about when it comes to understanding grief better is sort of twofold. It's about the physical symptoms, what's happening in your brain, the diminished capacity, so that people understand that what's happening to you is, first of all, it's real, you're not making it up, and that it's normal. Like, this is actually all things we can predict might happen to some degree at some point in this messy grief journey. So that part to me is really important, that people understand that, yes, there's physical pain, there's muscle weakness, there's confusion, there's grief brain, there's digestive system issues, your sleep is all messed up. Like, the list goes on and on and on. And there's probably like 10 things that are likely going to happen. And the other thing I think that needs really disrupting is our sense of what that timeline is supposed to look like. You know, I was chatting with a friend the other day who she's coming up on 5 years since her husband died. I'm coming up on 5 years since my son died. And she says the amount of times that people like expect her to like be over it and not like be thinking about him anymore or not be missing him anymore. And she's like, but that doesn't make any sense. They were married for 40 some odd years. She's going to be thinking about him and missing him for the rest of her life. And that's okay. That's part of what we're aiming for, is this sense of integration. So that understanding that we can be missing our person, we can be thinking about them years, decades, forever, you know, for the rest of our life. And that's okay. That's normal. We're not supposed to wrap it up in a little parcel and put it on a shelf somewhere. It's a part of who we are going forward.
Absolutely.
And, you know, as supporters, when we say things like, well, but aren't you over that yet? Or like, aren't you dating someone? Or, you know, whatever it is, that's really hurtful and it's harmful. And we don't intend to do harm. We're trying to be encouraging the person, but it doesn't work that way.
Absolutely. I wrote that in my article. It's the reason I wrote my article, because I felt like, and I feel like a lot of times you see this in social media a lot with people where someone passed away and then maybe they're dating someone, or there is no timeline. Everyone's unique in their process of grief. And you don't know how long maybe somebody, I mean, it's nobody's judgment, right? It's being very open and supportive of each other. So I like that. There is no timeline for grief. I think that should be a quote, and put that up there. No timeline for grief. Absolutely.
And that sense that we have is like that most intense part that's really hard to navigate, where you need support from people, is like 6 to 9 months, probably for most people. And the early part, where it's still really impacting our life, is like the first 2 years. So when we expect people to be over it in days or weeks, like, we're wildly off the mark.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you something. Maybe, you know, I don't know if you can think about this from your perspective of grief, but one of the reasons I started my podcast, and maybe it's because people were grieving, but a lot of conversations I had where they were depressed and they've lost their passion. They've really lost their passion for learning. And I know grief can trigger that. So if somebody's listening that's grieving, that's lost their passion, maybe for even living because the person they love so much is no longer there, what advice would you have for that person to help them move forward?
The first thing we need to be is really compassionate with ourselves and give ourselves a lot of grace for whatever is happening for us, for whatever is real, to be acceptable. And that's not about sort of wallowing in it or any of that piece, but it's just not resisting it, allowing it to be okay, even when it feels horrible. And I think the path out of that really sort of heavy place is that curiosity piece. It's that little bit of like, is there something beautiful? Is there something I can appreciate? Is there something that actually feels good-ish in my day? Is there something even, if you're right in the depths where everything feels heavy, is there something that felt a little bit lighter? Like, we're not leaping the Grand Canyon. We're doing baby steps. So if everything feels overwhelmingly heavy, is there one thing that felt a little bit lighter than the rest? And how do we find more of that?
Yeah.
How do we get out in nature? How do we find, we get a great amount of joy from our grief dog. We got a dog after Ben died, and he's been such a source of joy to us because he's a dog. And so he's happy and he's silly and he's all the things that we really struggled to be, but we could be peripherally through him, if that makes sense. So it's finding those little moments. And I think for me, in those darkest days, my mantra really was like, in this moment, I'm okay. I'm safe. I have food in the fridge. I have clothes on my body. Like, really, in this moment, I'm okay.
I'm okay. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me today. You are an incredibly beautiful person, and what you're doing is so powerful and important. Everyone grieves. You can grieve a person, you can grieve an experience, you can grieve a pet, you can grieve a lot. You can grieve a thing. Maybe you had a car and you don't have the car anymore. You can grieve a lot of different things. You can grieve a marriage. You can grieve a friendship. This isn't just about life or death. I mean, grief is something that all of us experience multiple times throughout our life. So Suzanne, if somebody wants to connect with you, tell us where they can find you. Leave us today on this Friday Junior with some inspiration and lasting words.
Yeah, the best place to find me really is on LinkedIn, or Facebook. I'm not very good at Instagram. I don't do it for as often as I should, but LinkedIn and Facebook, I'm pretty active there. You can find me at my website, SuzanneJabour.com. I'm very grateful that I have like a name that nobody else has. So if you can remember Suzanne Jabour, you can find me pretty much anywhere. And I really would say, just as the sort of, the takeaway of the day, a lot of it is about permission to ourselves to grieve as messily as we need to in any given moment, and permission for other people to do the same for every loss.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If you're listening, be sure to like and enjoy our podcast. Until next week, we will see you then. Bye.